Hello and welcome to the Little Minds Big Ideas podcast with the Early Years Network. This week's episode looks a little bit different as I am handing the baton over to the boys and Ben is joined by Claudio to talk all things men in childcare. So I hope you enjoy the episode and I will be back next week. Enjoy!
Hello everyone, so thanks to Emily for that introduction. I am today joined by Claudio from Men in Childcare. Is that right? Have I nailed that?
Yeah, that's Male Childcare Teaching Jobs.
Before we start, I thought it'd be good to give everyone a little introduction into who you are, a little bit about your background and sort of what you guys do over in Men in Childcare.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much for having me today, Ben.
No problem.
And my name is Claudio, and I have been working in the early years industry for about 12 years, nearly 13 now. And I started out as an apprentice, and as I may probably relate to many other men in the industry, I just fell into the sector. So it was by pure chance that I started working in early years and ended up loving it in the end. Started out as an apprentice, worked my way up to a nursery manager role quite rapidly. And I actually owned my own setting for a couple of years as well before the pandemic.
Okay.
I sadly had to shut it down because of the pandemic. And it was during the lockdown that I started pondering on my experience in early years, and I started connecting with more and more men in the sector. So sort of like started to get out of my four nursery walls and started to network with the community, with the earliest community. And it was then that I realized that there were lots of other people like me, lots of other men who experienced the same challenges that I did in the early years industry. And that's when I started to put together Male Childcare and Teaching Jobs as an organization. You know, I really wanted to provide a platform for men in the sector, not only to get together and network with each other, but to share success stories and to point them in the right direction when it comes to finding an inclusive employer.
Right.
As obviously many of us, they have experienced discrimination in the past. Loads of challenges when it comes to parental concerns, discrimination from other members of staff as well.
Yeah.
And
Never really the children though.
No, never.
But that's the thing, isn't it, in early years? Children aren't really ever the problem.
Yep, exactly. I totally agree with you. And if that actually, children, I feel that they show a specific interest in us men being around them for some reason. I found it myself, especially in my experience working with some children with additional needs, special educational needs. I found that some of those children would genuinely more naturally be attracted to an adult that would share the same characteristics as them, such as gender. You know, I used to work with a child who was deaf, and he. Every time he wanted some reassurance, he was getting stressed in the classroom because of loud noises, because he used to have a cochlear implant.
Right.
So, any reverberations of sounds in the classroom would affect his mood pretty much. And whenever he was seeking reassurance from an adult, it would naturally just come to me. So I do feel that, children are somewhat...
Well, you do seek yourself in... So you do often... It's human nature to see yourself in others and to want to participate socially with people of the same gender as you. Scientifically proven that as an element of human society. Before we get into it then, where can people find you? Where will they be able to find your stuff on socials?
So I'm on LinkedIn as Claudio Sisera. That's where most of my advocacy work is happening.
Right.
And our website is called Male Childcare and Teaching Jobs, .co.uk. So if you go on our website, you'll find plenty of resources about men in early years, pretty much tips for employers on how to be more inclusive. But at the same time, we have a community platform where men can get together as a sector and share their experiences and overcome those feelings of isolation that they might experience in the setting. I feel that that's something that not only have I experienced in the past, but many other men out there that I've spoken with have too. There's especially with lack of same gender mentorship happening in nurseries at the moment. So many men out there, they might be the only male working in their setting. So I find that, and they find that, having that man
of the community, isn't it, to fall back on? It's those other people that you can talk to.
Yes, exactly.
The other voice, if you like.
Yeah.
So I thought today we could have a general chat about the landscape of early years, how men sort of fit into that landscape. To make it easy, I thought we'd talk about the benefits of men working in early years from the perspective of two males. And then we could also talk about the obstacles and challenges that males face in terms of getting into the industry, and then also those of them in the industry, sort of the challenges they can find day to day. And then we'll talk a little bit maybe about what the future holds for men in early years. So to start off with, when I think about males in early years and we think about men working within the sector, and we talk about the benefits of men coming in the sector, the thing always springs to my mind is role modelling and the role of men as role models for children. And that's not just, often it gets portrayed as children that come from just a mum background, so the father isn't present in the household anymore. But in general, it can be a wider scope of children than that, because when you look at early years sectors, it's no surprise to anyone. You look at nurseries, they are predominantly filled with female practitioners. So having that injection of male as a presence can be really beneficial from a role modelling standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's crucial to understand that a gender diverse teaching workforce can bring a huge number of benefits for children. So, for example, there's a research from the Griffith University in Australia that states whilst there aren't any differences in general intelligence between men and women, there are some cognitive differences.
Right.
So, for example, the way men approach spatial reasoning, which is the ability to visualize and manipulate 2D and 3D shapes and spaces in the environment, is different. And in my opinion, that's quite an explanation to the reason why men seem to be more attracted to roles like forest school, for example, or outdoor play, sports, or woodworking. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that we should be reinforcing those stereotypes around.
I was going to say, do you not think that just... Because often when you hear males in early years, and this applies to teaching as well, because a lot of feedback I've had from teachers around males in working in education as a whole, let's say, often boils down to men are seen as the disciplinarians. Men are seen as the ones that have to carry out that sterner tone of things, and then sport and forest school. Well, that's not really breaking down gender stereotypes, I guess, is it?
Yeah, no, it isn't. But I think it's about like finding a way to attract those men into the sector. So I think you should really, really get to know what men in your local community are interested in the first place. And I believe that there should be like a certain degree of flexibility when it comes to leveraging those stereotypes.
There's a fine line, isn't there, between finding what someone's genuinely interested in? Because obviously everyone knows that we own children's day nurseries, and if I'm ever to go into numbers, I always say preschool, I'll deal with forest school because that's just what I enjoy.
There you go.
But that is playing into, because I'll go out there, I'll do all forest school, I might play sport with them, play a bit of football. I'm playing into stereotypes there massively, because I never put my hand up and say, right, I'll take on a mature nurturing role and I'll go doing the baby and I'll cuddle babies for 3 hours.
Yep.
But it's a mixture between stereotypes and what I find interesting and what my passion is.
Absolutely. And that's why I say, like, I don't think it's correct to assume that every man wants to do those kind of activities. But again, when you interview a man or when you're trying to make some research about your local community, try to get an understanding of what they enjoy doing the most. And then potentially, you could create your own mini role within your setting based on those interests, whether that be music, dance, or again, sports, outdoor activities, or woodworking.
And it's the same for all member stuff. I always say, find out about the individual that you have, because the odds are they'll have something within their personal life that will be a real big asset to early years, whether they go home, like you say, they really enjoy cooking or they really enjoy music. We've got one of our nursery managers, she's Olivia, who works on the Early Years Network. She's an actress, so she does a lot of acting in her spare time. And you can walk into a nursery and you'll hear Olivia singing Disney songs in a theatrical way all the time. It's amazing. But I think that's an interesting, it's almost a battleground, isn't it, between conforming to gender stereotypes, but also that's genuinely the interest of the individual.
Yeah.
There's a hard workaround.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you just reminded me of one of the lunch covers that I used to work with, a man who used to get to the nursery by skateboard. So every time he would get to the nursery, and he would get like cheered by all of the children in the classroom, to the point that he started allowing his children to get on his skateboard and doing, activities, doing activities in the class. Not in the class, but in the garden. And now I can let you imagine the amount of disapproval that we got from, the rest of our staff team. But that was just to show like the sort of like impulsiveness that men sometimes can have when it comes to planning activities. And that's something that I can relate to a lot as well, especially when I came across an article from the Harvard Business Review website that showed the difference is in the way like men and women even apply for jobs.
Yeah.
So, for example, women are more likely to apply for a job only when they have the 100% of the requirement for the role, whereas men would only apply when they have around 60%. So that's something I can relate to personally as well. But that shows, like, I think, a different drive that we can have in the way we plan activities as well. I feel like sometimes a member of staff might get stuck into the risks associated with a specific activity or the consequences that it could.
Yeah. Do you know what? I often, when we talk about gender stereotypes and we talk about the differences between males and females, I think it's often easy to talk about, this doesn't make sense, but take the male and female element out of it. And the fact that males often bring, whether because it's right that stereotypes exist or whether we want to accept they exist, males will, and children often find exciting to have that male role model in, is because of the differences, naturally or unnaturally, that they bring in terms of, you'll often find males slightly more physical in the sense of play. Like you say, they'll bring that slightly more boisterous element to outdoors. And that's not to say all females don't, because there's lots of outdoorsy females who are into sport, and I'm not saying it's that carte blanche, but I think it's often that element you get from them, and then mixed in with the element of boys are able to identify with that man because they're the same gender. And I think that does help in terms of having that understanding, and that, like I said at the very start of it, that role model from a gender line.
Agreed. And I think that there's a massive factor that impacts this, which is the way men and women develop empathy in different ways. So, for example, statistically speaking, there are some studies that show that women are more likely to develop emotional empathy, which is the ability to feel empathy but share the same feelings that other people's feel. So, for example, somebody might be feeling the same pain or the same joy that the other person is feeling at the same time, whereas men are more likely to develop cognitive empathy, which is more about trying to put oneself into somebody else's shoes, trying to understand the other person's perspective. Now, I can totally relate to that, thinking back of my experience, especially when I once had a parent not wanting me to change their child's nappy. So which seems quite a common anecdote for many in early years. Obviously, that devastated me emotionally, especially because it was right at the beginning of my career. So I didn't quite develop that resilience when it comes to that. But I found that after having the right support from a nursery manager, which was fantastic, I started.
And an important element of it, isn't it, to have that support?
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we will get onto the obstacles, because that's a big one, isn't it? Parent obstacles.
Oh, yes.
And that perception. And that links again back to stereotypes. This is always sort of coming back to conforming with stereotypes in society, and specifically Western society as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like I did develop that sort of like cognitive empathy whilst.
It's interesting you talk about it from a neurological perspective. Have you ever read any of the work by Lisa Feldman Barrett? Are you aware of that?
No.
Lisa Feldman Barrett's well publicized neuroscience specialist from America, and it is always really interesting because a lot of work she talks about. It talks about the structure of the brain and how we learn, and most importantly, that book particularly talks about how we develop emotions and the concepts of empathy and the concepts of feeling.
Right.
And I'm doing no work, not justice here, but in the long and short of it is, it's all to do with experience and how you construct experience as you go through your life based upon sensory input. And it's interesting because from day dot of birth, we're all experientially blind in the sense that we haven't had experiences yet. So everything is new to us as babies. And so those differences that you talked about from an empathy standpoint between males and females is learned because of societal norms, because of your experience. It's all learned behavior in that sense. Your understanding and concept of the world is constructed in your brain based upon those experiences you have. So it's interesting how empathy between males and females, it just split.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. Because women generally, if we're going to be really stereotypical now, they're the caring ones.
Yes.
And men are the you go out and kill and to survive to bring home food, isn't it?
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that there is a massive role that we can play as educators in shaping, well, first of all, tackling those gender stereotypes in children and, embedding gender inclusivity into our curriculum. But at the same time, shaping the way children develop empathy from the ground up, regardless of their gender. So, as you mentioned, women are always girls are always encouraged to show traits like nurturing traits or affective traits, whereas men they're never encouraged to display their emotions or show their vulnerability. And I feel that many men out there working in early years they resonate with that, and often they wouldn't show their vulnerability to their nursery managers just because of the misconceptions that society has pretty much, and all the pressure that they get from the broader society. And they should be looking weak. They shouldn't be asking for help because they're men, and they're supposed to look strong. So
it's funny, is it? Because men in early years is probably one of the greatest testing factors of how deep rooted these types of stereotypes are. And I always think the pinnacle of it is, like you mentioned, sort of touched upon earlier, is men working in baby rooms specifically.
Oh yes,
because even I'm fully aware of the concepts that we talk about gender. I'm fully aware, but even myself, in our settings, if a man came forward for the job to work in a baby room, it would make me double think.
Yeah,
I'd have to think twice about it, not only because of my own bias and my own perception of that, which exists in all of us, whether we admit it or not. There is always an element of, okay.
Yep.
But I would then have to think about my manager in terms of handling backlash, and it might not be severe backlash, but there would be murmurings from parents. And that's an element that you have to consider.
Yep.
But how ridiculous is it that we live in a society where we are brought up, and like we talked about brain structure, you formulate for experience, that you end up in a position where you would immediately question a male for being a predator, a paedophile, if you like, just because he's male.
Yeah, you know what? You'd be surprised to see the amount of articles I came across when I was putting together Male Childcare Teaching Jobs. Every time I was searching men in early years or men in education on the web, I would often stumble across episodes of negative episodes of safeguarding, and that's what I wanted to do with our platform as well. Overcome that habit that I just wanted to bring men to the news whenever they achieved something positive in their careers, and with a particular stress, on men working with younger children as well, because obviously there's not really many issues with men working in secondary teaching, or
it's the opposite, isn't it? Once you get to that, it's as you go up through the educational levels, it becomes more and more accepted. But I also then think we're going down another element of, I think, the schooling systems in terms of society in general see early years not really as education. It's more just looking after them and caring. Mm-hmm. And then as you go up through the educational system, well, then that's when real education, in quotation marks, starts. And then it becomes more disciplinarian, it becomes harder, becomes harsher, conformity, and those words appear. Whereas lower down the system, it's care, it's building bonds. But that isn't what males do. Males do the harsh, dictatorial stuff. Yeah. Women do that stuff.
Yeah, and that is so wrong. It's such wrong. And that only not only it helps digging a hole for the early years industry in a way, like you're. Sorry, I'm lost for words.
No, it is interesting though, because you then, it probably summarizes everything that's wrong with education, because at the top end of it, we could really benefit in secondary schools from that more, from what me and Em touched upon this on a recent podcast, but you could benefit from having that more nurturing element to it, that more tailored to the individual element to it, of style of learning, of more empatheticness. And equally, in the other end of it, in early years, we could probably do with having that more of a male, I'm not saying that harsh line, but more of a male presence. Yeah.
And I think one other thing that we could do, as early years practitioners, is to really, really raise the profile of the early years sector across other sectors as well. So one of the things that I remember doing myself, but also some of the other men that I know working in early years, was trying to hide the fact that we were working with children. Just because it's not really seen as a masculine,
it's embarrassing
job. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So when I started out in my career, I used to say, I'm just to make it easier and to make it more appealing, to my circle of friends, I would just say that I'm a teacher. I wouldn't specify the age group I'd be working with, just because I was concerned about what their reaction would be.
Conception of it, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So yeah, that's so wrong. And I think that's why there's so much work that we can do as educators and as like if we could do like advocacy work, lots of advocacy work around this, talk to not only fathers, but also, people from other sectors about how wonderful the early years is and how much there is behind it that is not ever often spoken of.
There's two things going on here, because you've got the conception of early years not being educational. Mm-hmm. It's not that important. When in reality, the first 5 years, people always talk about it, but from a foundational point, you can't redo the first 5 years. The neurological component of the framework that's created in terms of wiring in the brain and things like that, and the experiences that they want to set them up for not only the ability to learn in the future, not even concentration and things like that, but also from just a social standpoint. Those experiences, you can't redo it.
Yeah.
And though damage that's done in those first 5 years can be undone, it's not like you get to 5 and that's it.
Yeah.
It's harder.
Yeah.
And then the other flip of that is the stigma around and the battleground that is gender stereotypes. So you've almost got the schooling stereotype and then the gender stereotype going on here.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, it's a double challenge.
I mean, you've really got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things, I started doing after, I built some sort of resilience in the sector was to start talking to my friends about all the areas of learning and characteristics of effective learning that we learn about as practitioners. And, as I started exploring those areas with them, then even them, they started to realize, oh, there's so much more to it that I didn't think of, like they generally thought that all I was doing was playing with the children, and which is, a fundamental part of children's learning, but they didn't see it as developing learning, and, they didn't see it as shaping the future society as well of our world, and shaping those little brains.
Because even in itself, I mean, if you're going to talk about how do we, and we will talk a little bit, I mean, we're sort of amalgamating this all into one, but if we're then to look at the future of early years, and the future of early years is actually almost on a parallel to the future of society in a sense, because if you can break down those gender stereotypes, it starts with early years children. Somebody in their 30s, 40s and 50s who has these views now, it would be incredibly difficult to unpick that and undo it. But children in the early years being around males working and showing empathy and talking about feeling, and that aspect of it would in itself break down those stereotypes in their mind.
150%, yes.
And that's another reason why it's important.
Yes, I'm experiencing that firsthand. When I carry out some training sessions with some established nursery managers, I find it there are so many more barriers to it in comparison to speaking with newly established managers, and that's just because times are changing, luckily, towards the better. But there's still so much work that we can do, and educating the children that we have in our classrooms on gender equality, it definitely plays a role in the way that we are shaping the future society. And I feel that our responsibility as educators in our classrooms at the moment today is to tackle those gender stereotypes whenever we get a chance. So, some of the things that might sound basic to us as we speak now, but you'd be surprised to see how much that's still happening, is grouping, for example, men and boys in different activities. Mm-hmm. Or, for example, not allowing a boy to wear a dress, or maybe directing a girl more towards role play or dancing activities rather than getting hands-on construction activities. So these are little things that might look little to the normal eye, but you are instilling gender stereotypes if you don't tackle them.
When it comes to the brain and anything revolving around the brain, it's always the little things that make the biggest difference. It's always those minute details. I mean, babies especially, and then twos, they pick up on so much.
Yes.
Again, I'm going back to this book, but one of the ways she described the brain as a baby versus an adult. If you think about an adult, those desk lamps where they focus light on a very specific area and everything else around it's dark.
Yes.
That is the human's brain, because we've got the ability to concentrate. We can shine our light on a spot, and our brain has the ability to ignore all the other sensory input coming in. It's like your toes. You never feel the fact that your toes are touching each other. They are,
Yeah.
but your brain cuts that sensation, that feeling out,
Yeah.
because it would be completely worthless to constantly feel your toes rubbing against each other.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Which I can feel now, but
that's the thing. As soon as I start talking about it,
Yes.
as soon as it's like items of clothing on your body and your skin.
Yeah.
You don't feel it until I mention it, and then you're aware of it because I've brought it into your spotlight.
Yes.
Children are more like lamplights. You know, like when you go into a dark cave and you've got a lamplight that illuminates everything around you because they're sensory, but everything is novel to them.
Yes.
Everything is new, so everything is going into that brain.
Yep.
All at one moment, all the time. And that includes stereotypes and the way people talk about things. And that's the way they construct things like emotions. Because I'm saying the word when they cry, sad, 50 million times, they come to understand what sadness is that way.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have men in a classroom, in an earlier classroom, because just with the presence of men, you're like proving to the children that men and women can do the same jobs, and there's so many benefits to it when it comes to even interacting, like for girls to interact with adults of different gender. I think that by doing that in the long term, we can even solve problems like minority of women in male-dominated sectors, for example, tech or STEM or business. It's a skill. Like when little girls interact with male adults, you're building resilience and you're training those girls to interact with positive male role models of opposite gender.
I mean, if children go through education, let's just take the average. Let's just take Timmy, the little boy, and he goes through early years, and it's all female dominated. He gets into primary school, and the reception teacher's female, and then the only male he comes from an education standpoint is his football coach. And then he gets through to secondary school, and then there's a male teacher in DT, and also the PE teacher's a male. And then that's it. That's a stereotypical sort of journey through. Then he's going to build opinions, more than likely. That is weird if men work in early years, because he's conformed to that stereotype, and that's been created and been reinforced, because the only males he's known from educational, obviously other than his dad and his family members, is the football coach, which is stereotypically seen as a male thing, and then a DT coach. Well, it's hands-on, it's work, isn't it? And then you have to get a PE teacher, and you can just start, and that happens across the board all the time.
Yes, yeah.
So of course, it's never going to be broken into that stereotype because it's never challenged.
Yep, exactly.
So moving on then to talk about the other positive I highlighted, and then when I was thinking about it, I thought, hang on, is it though? And that's parent partnership. Do men, in your experience, is parent partnership easier male to male, or is it actually does it create more tension?
I think it depends, and that's a very interesting question. So I feel that having a male in a setting can improve parent partnership significantly, especially for those family backgrounds that are not, let's say, typical. So, for example, same gender parents or single fathers or single mothers as well. So, for example, let's say a father might feel like they can relate more to a male in a setting. Yeah. So, I do feel that can improve parent partnership. They might get automatically more involved into nursery life, knowing that there are other males like him involved in his children's lives.
Because originally I came from the idea of, it might stimulate and inspire males more seeing the child play and engaging with a male practitioner. But then I thought, well, hang on a second though. He also might go the opposite way and go, why is there a bloody bloke working inside the nursery?
I think it really depends, at what stage of learning the parent is as well. Yeah. So you should really, really, I think, make a thorough assessment of where your parents are with that, with gender inclusivity as a topic. So, some parents will be reluctant about that for sure. And I think that's where workshops and educating parents comes into place, very handy. You really should be finding out first of all where that parent is at their learning journey. If you feel like they might be reluctant about having a man working in early years, you should really, really be doing some educating sessions with them. You should be like sharing some information pack about benefits about having a gender diverse working environment.
I guess the other side of it as well, that it comes, a lot of what we do as human beings, a lot of opinions comes down to the element of probability and risk. And whether it's right in saying this or not, but I think statistically, I haven't actually done the research, but a lot of cases of sexual exploitation and child abuse, it is male dominated in terms of criminal element to it. And if you look at the abuse cases, it tends to be a male-orientated thing as opposed to a female-orientated thing. Not that there isn't females that are being, obviously, I'm not saying it's that black and white. Yeah. But that also probably doesn't help the general stereotype, does it?
No, it doesn't. And often, that I believe that what you just described is a result of sometimes fathers, lack of fathers' involvement into their children's lives that could develop aggressive behavior in boys, or that could then result in criminal activity. There's an interesting charity I came across, which is Lads Need Dads, and they are specifically yes, it's fantastic. They're specifically aiming to support those boys who are lacking a father figure into their lives by providing positive male role models with the objective to improve their lives, and to pretty much minimize any
because that is another one. If you go to look at crime statistics, and a lot of people who end up in jail who come from households that without a father, it is significantly higher,
unfortunately.
So yeah, absolutely, that's another. And maybe having more people in schooling systems from the get-go, male,
will definitely help. Yeah, will definitely support. So it's crucial for those families where a child might just have a single mother, for example, and they might not experience a positive male role model, like a non-violent male role model in their lives. So that's where a male educator comes in handy in a setting. They need to be that reference, that example that a child can look up to, that they might not experience at home. Same for let's say two mother households. And this is not to say that two mothers can't do same job as a mother and a father, but that child really, really needs to be exposed to a positive male figure, so that otherwise they might be developing sexist ideas as they grow, and that can only.
I think the more you're exposed to, like we say, experience-wise, from a positive point of view, and more positive reinforcements over openness with any regard, is a positive thing, whether it's on sex, race, gender, blah, blah, blah. I think the other aspect that we haven't quite delved into yet, we've talked about stereotypes of parents and reaction of parents. What about from your experience and the people that you work with in terms of internally in nurseries? Because obviously it can often be a male coming into work in a work environment that is absolutely predominantly female. Do you often find that can be a challenge or a positive or both?
So I do feel that company culture plays a huge role when it comes to this. So I've interviewed quite a few members of our community, and most of them seem to be sharing the same experiences. So let's say, for example, when they are shown around for the first time in a nursery, or they're going through an induction process, sometimes they often feel that they are just stared at by the members of staff as if they were an alien. And that's unfortunately something that most of us go through when we first join a nursery, and I'm not saying necessarily that's lack of culture in a nursery, but I don't think there's enough training delivered to those members of staff when it comes to.
And it's also highly likely that those members of staff carry the stereotypes we've been talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
many won't, but some will. I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure like a good chunk of those members of staff will have experienced things at home that will have reinforced those stereotypes. So they're just bringing that into work, and that's, it's just a vicious circle that repeats itself. But I think with the right guidance, from a nursery manager, and, by engaging in conversations about the inclusion of men in early years, we can help overcome those stereotypes, and we can hopefully make that induction process more appealing, let's say, for a man in early years. I don't think parental concern is a potential barrier when it comes to joining the sector.
So do you not think it'll put someone off? Do you not think it'll stop someone thinking, I'm not going to go work in a nursery because they'll just think I'm a pedo?
For what, sorry?
They'll just think that you're a paedophile or a predator.
I feel that's something that you experience once you start working in the sector.
That could put people off, because even you yourself earlier said that with your friends, you describe, or you met people, you described yourself as a teacher.
Yes.
And not necessarily in early years. Yep. So there's something going on there.
There is definitely something going on. Yes, I agree. And I feel that it's mostly down to the fact that it's not seen as a masculine job. rather than a feminine one. You know, I feel that a man might be deterred from joining the sector.
I guess it's when you get into the nurseries or you get into whatever school or whatever you might work in. I think it's probably a conversation around, doesn't matter if it's because you're male versus female. It could be you're black working in a work environment that's all white, for example, or it depends on the tolerance of the individuals that you're working with. You could be the only one who's gay, for example, within an all straight workforce. Yep. And again, it's all about the tolerance levels, I suppose, isn't it, of your colleagues, effectively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that not many men get out of secondary school and colleges thinking, oh, I want to get a job in early years. Yeah. I don't think that's really an option that's offered to them or suggested to them, which is also why I think there are not many of us joining the sector. So I think, like, you know, one thing that we really, really should be doing is go out to those secondary schools, colleges, even primary schools, you know, and do those career talks with children, you know, about caregiving roles, educating roles.
I mean, especially because early years needs every single member of staff it can get at the moment. So whether it's female or not, it's going to get to the point we'll have to start making robots, I think, to keep up with the government's plans.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've came across like that sort of like robot arm that was like rocking a baby's chair once. I was like, oh no,
that would be great.
We're not heading there, hopefully.
That'd be great for emotional attachment, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I think to sort of round this up, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the future holds in terms of males working early years. And from this conversation, a lot of it has stemmed around social norms, social gender stereotypes. Like, these are things that aren't going to go away anytime soon. I think you're talking decades and decades and decades to make any sort of real progress. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think the future of male working early years looks like, especially someone so invested in it as you are yourself?
Yes. So
actually, I'll probably phrase this and I'll give you two ways of looking at this. What do you think will happen, and what do you dream will happen? So reality versus what you'd love it to actually be in an ideal Claudio world.
Okay, in an ideal Claudio world, I wish to see 50% gender balance.
Okay.
Male versus female.
So that's a lot of males coming into the...
Yes.
By when, sorry?
By...
Because it'll take at least a year and a half to get them qualified.
Around 2030, maybe?
Crikey, okay. That's what, 6 years?
Yes. Yeah, gosh, that's... Yeah, when I set that goal was 3 years ago. So
okay, so that's probably hundreds of thousands of... they're probably not even born.
Let's say 2035, maybe.
It's going to cause a panic in some industries where all those males come out of.
Yeah, that's the ideal world. Obviously, that's a bit of a utopia, and we do want to be a bit more realistic about it. So, what I think is going to happen is we are going to increase male representation in the early years, especially with the times changing, and despite the fact that we haven't improved the situation over the past 25 years. But I feel that that's mainly due to the fact that we haven't really had...
Is that statistically a fact?
Yeah.
So in the last 25 years, the male workforce in early years hasn't grown?
No, we actually decreased now, because we used to be 3%. Used to be 3% male representation in early years, and now it's gone down to 2.8. Wow, so that's actually gone down.
Because you would have thought, as gender stereotypes in society thawed, so that if you go back 100 years, you know, women weren't even allowed out of the house, they couldn't vote. Do you know what I mean? And that old gender stereotype has thawed, and it's still not perfect, but you would think the other side would happen to men. And as a result, you would have thought there'd be more in this. I'm surprised that is the case.
Exactly. And you've touched on a point, like a very interesting point, actually, because there are so many organizations out there that promote, and I don't intend to be harsh on this by no means, but there are so many other organizations supporting women in fields that are male dominated. There isn't any movement happening for men in the early years industry, which is why I feel that there needs to be a centralized platform like ours that not only advocates for more men in early years and not only actively engages in campaigns with men's charities or secondary schools, colleges, universities, to get more students and more older men in society as well into the sector, but we create a proper community of support for those men as well, as encouraging more to get in the sector. I feel that if nurseries, earlier settings, primary schools, they all came together as a sector towards that mutual goal, we could really, really make strides in the industry. But until that moment, we we haven't improved and we're not going to improve if nurseries are not really willing to take active steps towards that. I can see, just to give an example, like loads of marketing going on with regards to nurseries being welcoming to men in early years, but that's just about it. Like they are making a statement, but I can't really see any practical.
There's no action behind the words.
Exactly.
The interesting is though, from an early years perspective, recruitment is so hard anyway at the moment, and we put job adverts out all the time. Men don't come through, so it's not like we are actively not pursuing males or not giving them opportunities. It's not a thing. It doesn't come on our radar. The opportunity is never there to employ males because no one's applying for the jobs. It is also interesting that settings have such difficulties at the moment, whether it be financially, whether it be can't find the staff. It's very difficult for smaller and independent settings to then actively, like you say, put budget towards high-level recruitment, bringing people in. The onus really falls upon, I'm not going to name names of chains, but the large 4 or 5 big boys across the country probably to have more onus on them, alongside the government, I would think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And that's why I think there is a need for our organization to be there, because we want to be the ones representing those little small employers as well. And whenever we engage with in recruitment, male only recruitment campaigns, we want to be the ones highlighting vacancies for those employers who are really, really looking to employ more men, but they don't have the resources for it. So there really should be a need to engage in male only recruitment campaigns. And I know that can be like can raise some issues and some concerns,
I can already foresee like we talked about off air beforehand about the feedback that one of our recent videos where I was talking about the difficulties young boys can have in terms of straddling 2 gender stereotypes. And then suddenly the comments got flooded with, the patriarchy, men built the patriarchy themselves, so they should suffer. When you talk about 3-year-olds, seems a bit wild to me. But, and I understand the sentiment that male stuff associated with males being manly, being strong and all these things is seen as a positive, whereas being empathetic and caring can be seen as weak, which then makes it easier for females to become more male-ish because it's seen as a strength, and men to become more feminine is seen as a negative. I get it. That part of their argument does logically make sense.
Yes.
But then just to say down with the patriarchy, it's male's fault, that's not helping anyone, because you're just turning it into a civil war.
Exactly.
But no benefit.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to talk about fixing that patriarchy, as they often talk about, then having male presence in early childhood, like we talked about, is a great step forward in that. So
Absolutely.
Your initiative in terms of trying to get males in it may seem counterproductive, but it really isn't. It's a really positive and beneficial step.
Absolutely. And it does have an impact on other sectors as well. In the long term, we'd really want to be able to develop children, young adults that are completely free from gender stereotypes. So everybody could choose a career path regardless of their gender, of their gender identity as well.
As long as you've got the skills.
Yes, exactly. Skills, you have to have the right skills, whether they are soft or technical, it's something that you can develop regardless. One of the concerns that we get from nursery managers about male-only recruitment campaigns is the legal side of it. So are we allowed to discriminate? Are we allowed to put up a job ad that only targets men? And, there's an interesting section in the Equality Act that I came across, which is the occupational requirements section that specifically says if you can justify the need for more men or the need for a person with a protected characteristic in your role, you can discriminate in a way. But
it's very rare that men are seen as, just generically seen as a protected characteristic, isn't it? I mean,
Exactly.
It's probably the only industry.
Yes, it's gender. It's one of the 9 protected characteristics, and there's so many benefits that you could justify by having men in your setting. One of the benefits that you could use is linking the male presence to promoting British values and the prevent duty, and that's one of the things that really, really baffles me. Whenever I attend a discussion panel about prevent duty or a training session, I don't really feel that there's enough emphasis put on gender extremism. There's often talks about racial extremism and cultural extremism,
FGM and things like that.
Exactly. But what about gender extremism? What about gender sexism that people develop further down the line? I don't know you, but every time I scroll down on Instagram, I feel that 70% of the content I see, 80% contains indirect gender stereotypes in it, and that's just contributing, to that gender-related sexism, whether it is women or men or any other gender.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we were talking to Em about it the other day, and I always talk about gender in a similar way to we talk about culture and things like that. And my fear is always in the future, we live in a world where everybody's the same and it's grey. And, people are scared to be proud of their culture, their cultural backgrounds, and gender can then play a bit. People are not proud to be male or not proud to be female. It's crazy. Like people from Ecuador who are female should be proud of being Ecuadorian and female. People from Poland and male should be proud of Poland. They shouldn't feel... Do you know what I'm trying to say? You should be embarrassed about it. Atrocities happen across the world, from whether you're English, you're German, you're whatever it might be. Atrocities always happen.
Yeah.
You shouldn't hold those negatives. You should be proud of who you are.
Absolutely. And you can cascade that onto the children as well in your practice. You should do that. So that's one of the things I was doing in my nursery. Like we would often highlight all the positives of each of our members of staff in children's culture, and not only support obviously English as an additional language through those activities, but just really building, fostering diversity in the setting and exposing children to as many positive role models as possible.
It's a balance between being proud of who you are, your background, your heritage, and being acceptant and welcoming of others, isn't it? That's probably the sweet spot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say that's something that I've learned myself by being in London. So I live in London and I've always worked in London, and there's so much diversity there. And I was only supposed to be in London actually for a couple of years and then move on to another European capital, but I ended up staying because of the diversity.
How long have you been in London now?
So it's been about 13 years nearly.
Oh, crikey.
So yeah, quite a long time, yeah. I just fell in love with the diversity that's not only in London, but in the country, I would say, across the UK, there's so many people coming from all different parts of the world, with so many different ideologies and ways of living. And I feel that children who grow up in this country, they're so lucky because they get so much exposure to it. Coming from Italy, the situation is completely different there. We don't really have that much diversity. Coming from the south of Italy, even less. But yeah, it's incredible. I think it's just unique, and you should be, embracing and accepting other people's cultures, but celebrating them really. Yeah. I think it's great.
Okay, well, I think with that will do for today. It's been lovely to have you on set and here on the Little Minds Big Ideas podcast. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Thank you very much. Yes, lovely.
And before we finish up, maybe one more time just to let people know where they can find you, Instagram handles, all that jazz.
Absolutely. So you can find us on main social media platforms, so on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook as Male Childcare Teaching Jobs. You can find me on LinkedIn as well as Claudio Sisera. So I do most of my advocacy work at the moment on LinkedIn and X. Yeah, I'm looking to expand hopefully Instagram and Facebook, but you'll find me there for sure.
Okay, cool. Well, it's been lovely to have you. I'm sure everyone found it incredibly insightful to hear two blokes talk about early years. And as always, guys, get your feedback on what you thought. Don't forget to drop us a like and rating across whatever podcast provider you use. And Emily will be back next week. So I will see you guys then.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.